This past summer, my partner and I planned a camping trip in the Adirondacks. It had been a long time coming. We both needed a break from work, the noise of the city, and just the general pressure of life. We were excited about something quiet and off the beaten path. We didn't want some busy campground with 50 other families around. We wanted seclusion, silence, maybe a lake to ourselves. I had found this privately owned little backwoods campsite online. It looked promising, actually it looked perfect. Only 2 lots, both very spread out from each other, right by the water, surrounded by trees. The website had glowing reviews and pictures that made it seem like a hidden gem. We booked it right away. When we arrived in the area, we had to stop by the owner's house to get the directions and gate code. Their house was up on the main road, a bit isolated from everything else. We pulled into their driveway and both kind of looked at each other. The place was weird. Not rundown cabin weird. More like horror movie set dressing weird. It was a trailer home. Nothing wrong with that by itself. But the yard was cluttered with the strangest junk I've ever seen. Piles of old, busted up furniture. Discolored doll parts, heads, limbs half buried in the weeds. Disfigured scarecrows propped up like someone had tried to make them look human on purpose. There were fish tanks with no fish, just old green water and mud. Random toys, weather-beaten and dirty, scattered around with no sign of any kids. It looked like a place that had once been alive and was now just rotting in slow motion. We didn't say anything right away, but the moment we stepped out of the car, I could feel this tightness in my chest, a sort of tension, not like immediate danger, but like something was off. I remember thinking I wouldn't want to be stuck here after dark. The owner came out to greet us, middle-aged guy, didn't say much beyond the directions, but something about his eyes stayed with me. Not friendly, not unfriendly, just blank, like he wasn't all there. Still, we'd come all this way and the reviews had been good. So we shrugged it off, got the code, and followed his directions to the site. The path to the site was technically accessible by car, but he hadn't been exaggerating when he said we'd need 4-wheel drive. Started out all right, just a grassy trail into the woods, but it quickly turned into a mess. This summer had been wetter than usual, and the ground was soft. Our tires slid more than once. The grass was slick with moisture. Puddles, some up to our knees when we stepped out to check, had turned patches of the trail into mini ponds. The trees pressed in closer and closer the deeper we went. Branches scraped against the windows. At first we laughed about it, trying to keep things light, but the further we went, the less funny it felt. At one point, I asked my partner to stop so I could walk ahead and check the trail. I got out and walked maybe 20 feet down the path, just trying to see if it got better or worse. That's when I saw it, a footprint in the mud, barefoot, clear as day. Not mine, not my partner's, too big to be mine. It was still holding its shape, like it had been made not long before we got there. My stomach dropped. The feeling I had back at the trailer came back, stronger. I didn't say anything about the footprint right away. I just turned around and told my partner to keep going slow. What were we supposed to do? There was no room to turn around. No way to reverse out without sliding or getting stuck. We were in it now. After what felt like forever, we finally reached the site. It was just before dark. The lake was beautiful, calm, untouched, ringed with trees, but neither of us could enjoy it. We set up camp quietly, like we were both trying not to admit how wrong this all felt. There was no cell service, no one for miles, just the woods, the water, and a cold silence that didn't feel peaceful anymore. That night it rained. Not just a drizzle, but a steady, heavy rain that lasted for hours. The sound of it on the tent was deafening. Every few minutes I'd think I heard something else. Footsteps, branches snapping, but I kept telling myself it was just the weather or animals. I barely slept. Neither did my partner. We didn't talk much. We were both lying there, pretending to be calm, but I know now we were both running scenarios in our heads. What if someone came down that trail? What if this was a setup? The kind of thing you only read about after it ends badly. The owner's yard flashed in my head over and over again. The dolls, the scarecrows, that footprint in the mud. The next morning we were soaked. The rain had finally let up, but everything was wet. The trail back would be worse than when we came in. The mud would be deeper, the puddles wider. We looked at each other and didn't even need to say anything. We had to get out. We weren't staying another night. We packed up in record time and walked ahead to check the trail. It was bad. Worse than bad. Some parts were nearly washed out. My partner wasn't even sure the truck could make it. But staying wasn't an option either. Not even for a minute longer. We climbed back into the truck and started inching our way out. The tires slipped constantly. A few times I thought we were done for. At one point we had to wedge rocks under the tires just to get traction. There was a moment, just one, where I thought we were going to have to abandon the truck and walk. But somehow my partner kept us moving. The truck, old, heavy, reliable, did the rest. Every minute felt like an hour. Every puddle felt like a trap. But slowly, we made it back up the path. When the trees started to thin out and I saw the break in the woods ahead, I nearly cried. We hit the main road like it was salvation. I could have kissed the pavement. We didn't say much, just let out this long breath we'd both been holding the entire night. I looked back once at the trail, just trees and mud, but it felt like something had let go of us. We drove straight to the nearest town, dirty, soaked, exhausted. I remember seeing the Dunkin' sign like it was a lighthouse. We sat inside for almost an hour with hot coffee and breakfast sandwiches, just staring at the table, trying to come down from the adrenaline. We booked a motel down the road, didn't even look at the pictures. We just needed 4 walls and a lock. Looking back now, I still don't really know what was going on there. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just a bad spot, a creepy yard, and a trail no one had maintained in years. But maybe not. That footprint in the mud, the dolls, the isolation, none of that felt normal. And the feeling we both had the entire time, that slow-building panic, it didn't come from nowhere. We weren't imagining it. We've camped since then, but we stick to proper sites now. Not because we're scared of the woods, we love the woods, but because people can be strange, unpredictable, and out there, away from roads and neighbors and help. Even one wrong detail can turn a peaceful trip into a nightmare. We learn to trust our instincts. When something feels off, it probably is. That gut feeling, that low thrum of unease isn't just paranoia. It's a warning. We should have listened earlier. We should have turned around when we first saw the place. Or at least when the path started going downhill, literally and figuratively. Next time, we will. 8 years ago, I went on a road trip I still think about sometimes, usually when I'm hiking or packing gear. It started in southern Ontario, where I live, and I drove down along the eastern seaboard, cutting through places like Pennsylvania, the Carolinas, Georgia. I wasn't on a schedule, just letting the road lead me. Eventually, I swung west, taking southern highways through Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico. Just me and the road, doing a kind of slow crawl toward California. I had my gear in the back of the car. Backpack, stove, food, my tent, everything. I wasn't planning to sleep in hotels. I preferred the kind of silence you only get out in the woods or under the sky, away from cities. I ended up in Utah almost by accident. I'd pulled off somewhere for gas, saw a rack of travel brochures, and picked up one with a photo of these orange-red rock formations that looked like something out of another planet. Bryce Canyon. I'd heard of it, but didn't know much beyond the name. The photo pulled me in, the crazy-looking hoodoos, the high desert landscape. I checked the map and realized I wasn't far. Maybe a few hours. That's nothing on a road trip like that. So I drove up, got a park pass, and parked the car in one of the lots near a trailhead that went down into the canyon. I planned to do a one-night out-and-back hike. I had enough water and supplies, and I knew I could set up camp at one of the designated sites near the bottom. The trail was dusty and dry, a red-orange dirt that got into everything. Your boots, your socks, the seams of your pack. It was hot in a way that's hard to describe if you're used to forest shade. There were barely any trees, just scattered shrubs and low plants clinging to the rock. Everything was exposed. I was used to boreal forest, dense green, wet soil, the smell of pine and moss and decay. This was completely different. Open sky, brittle ground, the kind of silence where you can hear your own blood moving. The descent wasn't hard, but the landscape played tricks on you. Depth and scale were weird. What looked like a short walk would take 20 minutes, and the walls of the canyon rose around you in a way that made you feel like an ant moving through someone's abandoned pottery collection. The hoodoos towered overhead, eroded into all kinds of strange, sharp shapes. I got to the bottom sometime in the early afternoon and started looking for a spot to set up camp. The site was marked on the map and easy enough to find. There were a few flat areas where previous campers had cleared away rocks. I chose a spot a little away from the main path and pitched my tent. I had enough water for the night and next morning. I'd packed more than usual since there weren't streams down there. Not like in Ontario where you're always near some lake or creek. I ate, read for a while, and took a short walk around the nearby area just to stretch my legs. I kept it close since I didn't want to be hiking unfamiliar trails near dark. Around dusk, I noticed the sky shifting. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some scattered clouds, a little darker than earlier. I figured it might cool things off. I wasn't worried. Back home, a few clouds meant nothing, and even when it rained, the forest helped break the fall, gave you some cover. But this was different. I just didn't know it yet. I went to sleep early, around 9. The sky had fully darkened by then, and I zipped myself into the tent. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a sound I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't wind or animals. It was soft, but persistent, like a brushing noise. Then I realized it was water, rain. Not much at first, just a light patter, then a steady tap. Still, I didn't panic. My tent was good for rain, and I'd set up on relatively high ground. What I hadn't realized was how different the soil was here, dry, compact, almost clay-like. It doesn't absorb water the same way forest soil does. And because the canyon was a bowl, all the water from above started flowing down, fast. By the time I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, there was already a small stream running a few feet away. Not deep, but moving fast. My boots sank half an inch in the softening dirt. I looked around and saw more little trickles coming down the rock walls on either side, joining together. I knew enough from past reading to understand what was about to happen. Flash flood. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my headlamp, stuffed my sleeping bag into the pack, shoved food and gear in as fast as I could. I didn't even break down the tent. I knew I wouldn't be able to carry everything fast enough and didn't care if I lost it. The water was getting louder, building momentum. I swung the pack over my shoulders, tightened the straps, and started moving uphill, fast. The trail was clear enough in daylight, but in the dark, with rain falling and water rushing past your feet, it became harder to see where to step. I slipped once, catching myself on my hands. My left knee hit a rock hard. I didn't stop to look at it. The rain picked up. The water that had been ankle-deep in some places started rising. Small channels turned into narrow rivers. I was breathing hard, partly from exertion, partly from fear. I wasn't used to this kind of danger, water that came out of nowhere with nowhere to go. I kept climbing. The sides of the canyon were steep, switchbacked in some parts, but slippery. The soil turned to mud quickly, and each step took effort. I stopped once to look behind me and saw the area I'd been camped in only minutes ago was now completely underwater. My tent was floating sideways, the top just barely visible. My stomach twisted at the sight of it. Another few minutes and I wouldn't have made it out. I kept climbing until I got to a rock outcropping a bit above the path. I pulled myself up and crouched under the narrow overhang, trying to catch my breath. My heart was racing. The rain was still coming down but lighter now, and the sky had started to pale just a little. Dawn was near. I waited maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Felt like longer. When the rain stopped, I kept going. The trail was clearer now in the early morning light, and the water had already started to drain away. But everything was soaked, and the climb out of the canyon was slow, careful. I finally reached the top just after sunrise. I stood at the rim, soaked to the skin, covered in mud, and looked back down. The path I'd taken was streaked with wet lines where water had carved through. My tent was gone, probably wedged under some rock or drifted down one of the side gullies. I made it back to the car, changed into dry clothes, and just sat in the front seat for a long time, staring at the wheel. I didn't feel like driving yet. I was shaking not from cold, but from the kind of adrenaline that doesn't go away right away. I'd been minutes away from getting trapped, and I don't know if I would have made it out if I'd waited just a little longer. That landscape doesn't give second chances. A few weeks later, after I'd made it to California and turned back toward home, I stopped in Ontario for one last hike in Algonquin Park. The woods felt familiar, dense, green, alive in a different way. It was late in the season, and the trail was quiet. I was with a friend that day, just a short loop hike. We weren't expecting to see anything out of the ordinary. We came around a bend and froze. 2 black bear cubs, maybe a year old, ambled across the trail just 10 feet in front of us. No fear, no rush, just wandered through like they owned the place, which honestly they kind of did. We didn't move, didn't breathe practically. I knew better than to linger. Where there are cubs, there's a mother, and they're not small. Black bears aren't as massive as grizzlies, but they're fast, strong, and protective. And even a smaller bear can tear you open without much effort. We slowly backed up the trail, watching the brush, listening for any crack or rustle. But we didn't see the mother. We turned around, made our way back to the car in silence, alert the whole time. That trip reminded me that the outdoors doesn't care how prepared you think you are. Doesn't care how many years you've camped or how many hikes you've done. Sometimes the danger is water rushing down a dry canyon. Sometimes it's a bear in the forest. You don't always get a warning, but if you're lucky, you get enough time to move. Enough time to learn something you won't forget. I haven't been back to Bryce since, but I still think about it. The way the ground changed under my feet. The speed of the water, the silence afterward. I kept the dented carabiner from that trip on my keychain for years, just to remind myself, pay attention. Out there, everything matters. Years ago, my ex and I went camping in a state park in Texas. It was early spring, still cool at night, but warm enough during the day that you didn't need more than a light jacket. She had picked the place. It was her idea to disconnect for a weekend, get out of the city noise, and just be somewhere green and quiet. I didn't argue. I liked camping and hadn't done it in a while. The drive took maybe 3.5 hours. Mostly highways, then back roads with fields on both sides, some cattle here and there, a few barns leaning with age. By the time we got there, the sun was starting to dip. It was still light enough to see clearly, but we knew we had to move quick. We found a site that was kind of perfect. A bit of space between us and the next couple of campsites, big trees with wide canopies, a clear view of the lake just beyond a thin row of smaller trees. I got to work putting the tent up while she pulled out the folding chairs and the small camping stove we'd brought. I remember feeling pretty good about how I set the tent up. I double-checked the stakes, added some extra support with big rocks I found nearby, and made sure the rainfly was pulled tight. I've had enough bad experiences with cheap tents in bad weather, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. The first night was peaceful. We made dinner, simple stuff, some hot dogs and beans. We sat and watched the sky turn orange and purple over the lake. There weren't many people nearby, and the few that were kept to themselves. After a few drinks, we climbed into the tent and passed out. The wind rustled the trees a bit, and I remember thinking it was the kind of night that made you forget anything stressful. The next day was just as calm. We made breakfast, walked a few trails, sat by the lake skipping rocks. It was warm out, but not too hot, and there was a bit of overcast sky drifting in by late afternoon. I didn't think much of it. Weather moves fast in Texas. One moment it's sunny, the next it's cloudy. You just deal with it. That night, things changed. I don't know what time it was, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. When I woke up, it wasn't a noise that woke me. It was light, flashes of light. I sat up in my sleeping bag and unzipped the door just a few inches. I could see flashlight beams sweeping across the campsite next to us. People were up and moving, fast. Some were running around like they'd lost something. Others were hurrying back and forth from the trail to their tents. At first I thought someone was hurt or something was wrong with an animal. Then I heard it, wind. Not regular wind either. This was deep, constant, like a freight train humming just far enough away to make your chest tighten. The air felt different, heavier, I got out of the tent, still barefoot, and stepped into the dirt. The trees were moving hard now. I saw a man with a flashlight pointing to the sky and talking to someone near the trail, his arm waving in an urgent motion. Then I spotted the park ranger running up the road, yelling something I couldn't make out at first. I started walking his way, and as he got closer, I finally heard the words, "Tornado." One had touched down on the other side of the lake. Everyone had to get out. That was all I needed to hear. I turned back, ran to the tent, unzipped the flap, and told her we had to move. She was already half awake. We grabbed what we could, our phones, the cooler, our bags, and threw them in the car. The wind was picking up by the second. Leaves and small branches were flying through the air. The tents around us were collapsing or being torn up. Right as I was throwing the last bag into the back seat, the air shifted. I swear to this day the rain didn't fall from above. It hit me straight in the chest. It was like the air exploded around me. The wind knocked me flat onto my back. I couldn't breathe for a second. The pressure was so weird, like something had sucked the air out of the world. I rolled over, got on my hands and knees, and forced myself to stand. I felt gravel and wet leaves stick to my arms as I stumbled to the driver's door. I got in, soaked, breathing hard, heart slamming in my ears. We pulled out behind a few other vehicles. No one was wasting time. Brake lights lit the trail as we all drove in silence, the storm flashing behind us. I couldn't see much outside the windshield, just shapes of trees bending, sheets of water pouring sideways, and the red glow of tail lights ahead. It wasn't until we got out of the park and onto the main road that I felt my hands stop shaking. We drove straight to her sister's place. She lived maybe 25 minutes away, up on higher ground. Her place was untouched. We stayed there the rest of the night. The next morning, the sky was blue, calm, like nothing happened. But when we got back to the park, it was like a war zone. The entrance gate was open, no rangers in sight. We parked near our site and walked in. The road was covered in branches and torn up bark. Trees that had stood tall yesterday were now sideways, roots sticking up like fingers clawing at the sky. I didn't recognize parts of the trail. Whole sections had been cleared out by wind. The ground flattened. It looked wrong. When we got to our site, I stopped walking. The tent was still there. My tent. It was still standing right where we left it. The fly was flapping in the wind a bit, but the structure was intact. I stood there, kinda stunned. Everything else was gone. The chairs, the stove, even the tablecloth we'd tied down was missing. The cooler we didn't grab had vanished. But that tent was still right there. All the other sites around us, empty. Some looked like no one had ever been there. Others had scraps. Ripped nylon, bent poles, broken branches scattered where someone must have camped. A few of the fire pits were filled with soggy ash and leaves. We packed up what was left. There wasn't much. I took my time folding the tent, shaking off the dirt and twigs, checking the seams. I wasn't just proud of how well it held up. I was honestly surprised it didn't get ripped apart like everything else. We didn't camp again for a while after that. She and I didn't last long either. But every time I think about that night, I remember the moment I got knocked down by wind and rain coming sideways, the roar around me, and the feeling of not knowing if we were going to make it out. And then I remember the calm after, and walking into that broken park, and seeing the tent still there like it had waited for us to come back. Sometimes people ask if we would have been sucked up or killed if we had stayed. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I floated a big creek in the middle of nowhere with a buddy using pack rafts. We had planned the trip for weeks. An overnight run, no cell service, no other people, just us and the water. It was one of those long, winding creeks in the backcountry that eventually feeds into a river system. The area was only accessible by boat or by a gnarly 4WD road that barely showed up on topo maps. That's what made it feel special. That isolation, that quiet. We paddled most of the day. The current was steady, no real rapids to worry about, just the occasional shallow gravel bar or fallen tree to steer around. Midday, we stopped to stretch and eat, and by late afternoon we started looking for a place to camp. We found this wide, flat stretch on the inside bend of the creek. It was slightly elevated, dry, with enough room to pitch both our tents and cook a decent meal without trampling each other. Across the creek, a couple 100 feet away, there was a break in the trees and a sloped path leading up. It looked like it connected to the access road we'd seen on satellite images. That road supposedly wound back through the hills for miles before reaching anything close to a highway. We dragged the boats up on shore and started setting up. By the time the sun dipped low, we had tents staked, firewood collected, and water filtered. We cooked something basic, ramen, sausage, and some freeze-dried vegetables. We ate on logs by the fire, barely talking, just enjoying the way the trees framed the last of the light. It was the kind of evening where everything feels still. No bugs, no wind, just the sound of the water moving past and some night birds settling in. By full dark, we had the fire low and were winding down. No lanterns, just our headlamps set to red light to preserve night vision. We weren't expecting anyone to be out here. We'd seen no tire tracks at the put-in, and no boats the entire day. Then we heard it, a low, droning hum that started growing louder. It was an engine, a truck maybe, bouncing slowly down the rough road on the far side. Headlights broke through the trees and lit up that sloped path across the creek. Pulled into the flat and stopped. At first, it was hard to see what was going on, but it wasn't long before music started thumping loud, bass-heavy stuff, and 2, maybe 3 people piled out. At first, we just watched from our side, sitting still and quiet. It wasn't our land, not our business. People party. Maybe they came out to blow off steam. But the loudness of it, the yelling, the laughter, something about it felt off. We turned off our headlamps and dimmed our fire to a glow. We didn't want to draw attention. A few minutes later, we heard the first shots. Sharp cracks echoing out from their side of the creek. 3, 4, maybe 5 in a row. At first, I thought it was fireworks, but the echo off the trees told me different. It was a gun, no doubt. Probably a pistol. The shots were spaced out, almost casual. Just someone emptying a mag into the dirt bank beside their truck. I remember telling myself not to panic. People shoot out here. It's legal. Maybe stupid at night, but not illegal. We stayed in full stealth mode, no lights, no talking, just sitting in the dark on our logs, listening. The music kept going. A second round of gunshots, a little louder this time, like maybe a different weapon. Still, they all sounded like they were aimed at the same dirt bank. Then the third round started. The sound was different this time. Sharper, more violent cracks, and then came the sound that made my stomach drop. Whiz, a faint, high-pitched zip, like a bee flying too close to your ear. Then again, pop whiz, pop whiz, pop whiz. It took maybe 2 seconds to realize what was happening, but the moment I heard the third one, I was up and yelling before I even registered it. They weren't just shooting at the dirt bank anymore. They were firing across the damn creek. We were in the dark, sure, but we were there. Tents, boats, us sitting there, all of it. We scrambled to our feet. My heart was hammering in my ears. We turned on our headlamps full blast and waved our arms and started shouting. Not words, just loud, panicked yelling to make ourselves known. We were standing in full light now, shining our beams across the creek toward the truck. Hands up. The music cut off instantly. I saw a flashlight jerk wildly on the far side. Then doors slammed, 1, 2, 3, and the truck roared to life and backed up so fast it fishtailed. Then it peeled out and vanished up the trail in a spray of gravel and tail lights. Gone. We just stood there in the light, breathing hard. I remember looking down at my shirt to see if I'd been hit. I hadn't, neither of us had, but it was a real possibility. Those bullets had been close. You could hear the air being split. They weren't BBs. They were fast and sharp and deadly. We didn't sleep much that night. We put out the fire completely, kept lights off, and lay in our tents wide-eyed, listening to the sound of the creek and every snapping twig like it was a warning. I kept imagining the truck coming back. Maybe they were drunk or high or just dumb as hell. But part of me thought maybe they knew someone might have been down here, that maybe it wasn't random. Morning couldn't come fast enough. At first light, we broke camp in record time. Didn't even eat. Just packed everything as fast as we could and shoved off down the creek. Every corner we turned, I kept looking for signs of tire tracks or another vehicle. I just wanted to get out of there. We paddled hard all day until we hit the next takeout point, a small dirt road bridge where we had left a shuttle vehicle. We didn't even talk much on the drive back. Both of us were wired, exhausted, still trying to shake off what happened. Looking back, I think what shakes me most is how close we came to getting killed over nothing. A few more degrees in the wrong direction and one of those shots could have hit a tent, or worse, one of us. They didn't know we were there. Or maybe they did and didn't care. That thought's worse. We never reported it. What would we say? No plate numbers, no faces, just a few drunk idiots in the woods with guns. The kind of people that disappear into the hills and don't think twice. But I learned something out there. Remote doesn't mean safe. People can find you anywhere, and some of them are just plain dangerous. I still camp, still float creeks, but I trust my gut more now. If I even sense someone's out there being reckless, I move on. You never know how close you are to something going very, very wrong until it's already too late. It was early June when a few of us decided to do a weekend off-grid camping trip in northern Michigan. We wanted somewhere remote, peaceful, no other campers around. Just thick woods, the sound of birds, and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. We found this spot after some online research. Wasn't even a marked campground, just a patch of forest that was far enough away from civilization to not hear a single car, and close enough to a creek that we could filter water. No cell signal, no GPS reception, nothing but trees and sky. There were 4 of us, all old friends from school. We loaded up our gear in 2 trucks, brought coolers of food, a few tarps and basic camping stuff, knives, headlamps, rope, first aid. That first night was solid. We set up camp a little before sunset, got a fire going, and cooked up a mix of hot dogs and a few cobs of sweet corn wrapped in foil. We drank a few beers, played cards under our lantern light, and fell asleep to the sounds of crickets and a breeze moving through the pines. It was one of those perfect camping nights, quiet and cool, with just enough rustling in the woods to remind you that nature's always alive around you. The next morning, the sun was barely up when I woke up with that unmistakable stomach feeling. The kind that comes fast and doesn't wait. Probably the corn, maybe the beers, maybe both. I grabbed the little roll of toilet paper we had tucked in a Ziploc bag and started walking away from the tents. I knew the unspoken rule: get far enough away that no one has to deal with the aftermath. So I followed a faint deer trail off into the woods, stepping over fallen logs and ducking under low branches. I didn't pace it out, but I'd guess I was about 300 feet from camp, maybe a little more. The air was still, no birds yet, just the kind of quiet you only get in the woods before full daylight. The ground was still damp from the morning dew, and everything smelled like earth and pine needles. I found a little dip in the trail, not too muddy, surrounded by thick shrubs and some tall grass. Felt private enough. I pulled my pants down, squatted, and tried to focus. And for a while I did. I wasn't thinking about anything but getting the job done. Staring at the dirt, trying to not think about how cold it felt on my ankles. Then, slowly, real slow, I got this feeling in my chest. It was like someone had just touched the back of my neck, except no one was there. My skin prickled. I don't know what made me look up. Maybe instinct, maybe the fact that my mind finally caught up to the quiet around me. But I did. There, not even a foot away from where I was squatting, was a wolf. A full-grown, wild-ass wolf. I froze. Not a muscle moved. I didn't even breathe. It was standing there, half turned like it was about to walk off, its head already pointed away from me. I didn't see its eyes, just its shape, tall, long legs, thick gray-brown fur, and big. Way bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. It had clearly come from behind that patch of brush and must have walked up without making a sound. And it had gotten that close to me. I never heard a twig snap, never caught movement out the corner of my eye. Nothing. The craziest part was how calm it looked. It wasn't tensed or growling. Its ears weren't back. It was just there, as if it had already checked me out and decided I wasn't worth bothering with. And I must have looked so pathetic, pants around my ankles, squatting in a bush like a dumb animal. It stood there another second or two, then casually turned and padded off into the trees like it was late for something else. I stayed absolutely still for what felt like 10 full minutes after it left. My heart was hammering, stomach totally forgotten. Eventually, I pulled myself together, literally, and started the slow walk back to camp. I kept turning around to look behind me the whole way. Every broken branch or bird call made me jump. The woods suddenly felt a lot less friendly than they had the night before. I don't even remember if I finished what I went out there to do. I might have cut it short just from pure adrenaline. When I got back, the guys were still asleep. I didn't wake them. I just sat on the cooler for a long time, sipping water, listening to the forest. I told them about it a few hours later once we were all up and eating breakfast. They didn't believe me at first, thought I was messing with them, but I wasn't laughing. And eventually they could tell by the way I kept scanning the trees around camp that I was dead serious. We found a few faint paw prints out by the path later that morning. One of the guys tried to say it might have been a coyote, but I know what I saw. Coyotes aren't that big. This thing was almost up to my chest, standing on all fours. It had presence. The rest of the trip went on without any more surprises. We stayed an extra night but kept the fire bigger and closer to camp. I didn't wander far off again, even in daylight. Anytime I needed to go out into the woods alone, I had a bear horn on me, just in case. But the wolf never came back. Or if it did, we never saw it. Looking back, I think about how easily that could have gone a different way. If I had startled it, or if it had been a more aggressive animal, or even if I had looked up a second later. I could have been face to face with a wild predator with my pants down and no weapon nearby. No one would have heard me scream out there. We were that far from everything. But the way it happened, it was like I didn't even register as a threat or as food. Just something to be noted and ignored. The wolf was the one in control, and it decided I wasn't worth its time. That part stuck with me more than anything. It wasn't a violent encounter. There was no chase, no growling, no need to run. But it's still one of the scariest moments I've ever experienced. That cold realization that something wild, something powerful, had gotten that close without me even noticing. That I was totally vulnerable and didn't even know it. Changed how I think about the woods. I still go camping, still love being out there with nothing but trees around me. But I don't let my guard down like I used to. Now I pay attention to the sounds, the silence, the air. I make noise when I walk. I carry a knife and bear spray, even for quick bathroom trips. I don't trust that the quiet means I'm alone anymore. But I'll say this, if I had to run into something out there, I'm glad it was a wolf. Calm, silent, almost respectful in its own way. It let me have my dignity, barely, and walked off like it had better things to do. Perfect gentleman, really. Still, every time I think about it, I get this weird chill. Not from fear exactly, but from the memory of how close it got. How real it was. Not a story, not a movie, just me and a wild animal in the woods, sharing a moment no one else saw. And I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't looked up. We were 17, maybe 18, that summer when we went camping way out near the Old Quarry River Bend. It wasn't a campground, just this spot deep in the woods that one of the guys knew about. We parked a few cars in a clearing and hiked maybe 20 minutes down a game trail to the river. No cell service, no signs, no one around for miles. We brought tents, sleeping bags, a bunch of food, a few cheap lanterns, a tiny flashlight, and a ton of weed. I remember that part vividly. My buddy Eric was always the one who took rolling joints to the next level, but that night he outdid himself. He'd brought, no joke, an entire brick of zigzags, and while we were setting up the tents and gathering firewood, he sat cross-legged on a flat rock and started building what we ended up calling the Cheech and Chong Special. I didn't think he'd actually be able to do it, but he ripped off the glue strips from like 9 or 10 different papers, licked them, and patched 9 full-sized zigzags into a 3x3 square. Then he ground up what had to be at least 5 grams of bud and rolled this monster. It looked ridiculous, like a little baseball bat made of paper. While he was doing that, me and a couple others dropped tabs of acid. Not a smart decision in hindsight, I'd only done it once before, and it had been mild. But this stuff was stronger. We didn't know it yet, but we'd soon find out. The sun was starting to go down, and the sky had that soft pink-orange glow that you only see in the woods, where everything feels quiet and wide open. We headed down to the riverbank, maybe a 5-minute walk through thick brush, to smoke. It was peaceful at first. The water moved lazily over smooth rocks, and we could see the moon just beginning to rise through the trees across the river. Someone sparked the joint, and we passed it around, coughing and laughing, not really talking much. The acid kicked in maybe 10 or 15 minutes into smoking. It hit hard and fast. The trees started swaying, and I don't mean with the wind. I mean they were bending and pulsing like they were breathing. The stars above us looked like they were twinkling too fast, like someone was flicking a light switch over and over. We didn't think anything was wrong at first. We just giggled, said we were tripping balls, and laid back on the rocks near the water. But then it got darker, and someone mentioned we should probably head back to camp. That's when it got bad. Real bad. We stood up and tried to figure out which way we came from. The path that had been so obvious earlier was just gone. Everything looked the same. The bushes, the trees, even the rocks. We pointed in 3 different directions before just settling on one and walking single file. Only one guy had a flashlight, and it was a tiny, barely working one from a keychain. It threw this weak yellow beam that did more to cast weird shadows than light anything up. The deeper we walked, the more I realized we were definitely lost. Every 10 feet someone would stop and say, "Wait, wasn't this the way we came from?" Or, "Didn't we pass this log already?" The acid made it impossible to focus. Trees looked like people standing just out of reach. Branches creaked and cracked above us, and every little sound made someone jump. The forest felt like it was closing in. I remember at one point thinking we were walking in circles, but when I looked behind me, I couldn't even see the last guy anymore, just darkness. And then we heard them, wolves, not close but not far either. That low, drawn-out howling. It echoed through the trees, bouncing from different directions, so we couldn't tell where they were. I remember my stomach twisting hard when I heard it, like a switch flipped. I wasn't high anymore, I was scared. The howls kept coming, sometimes 1, sometimes 2 at a time. My brain kept trying to convince me we were hearing echoes, that it was the same wolf, but I knew that wasn't true. My heart was pounding, and my mouth had gone bone dry. No one spoke after that. We just kept walking fast, not running, because none of us knew where we were. But I could feel everyone's panic rising. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something in the shadows. At one point, Eric tripped over a root and fell hard. We helped him up, but he was shaking and muttering that something was following us. I wanted to tell him to shut up, but honestly, I was thinking the same thing. The woods behind us felt heavier, like something was pushing out the air. It must have been hours. We walked in total confusion, sometimes doubling back when we hit a patch of brambles or thick brush. The cold started to set in, even though it had been warm during the day. The river had long vanished behind us. Our legs were sore, and our minds were fraying at the edges. I kept seeing little flashes of movement in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. We started hearing rustling too. Could have been animals, could have been our own footsteps echoing weirdly, but when you're on acid and lost in the woods at night, everything sounds like danger. It was around dawn when we finally saw something familiar. Someone spotted the little red flannel blanket we'd hung up near camp to dry. It was hanging limp between 2 trees, and I almost cried. I've never felt such relief in my life. We were dirty, scratched up, and utterly spent, but we stumbled into our camp like survivors of a wreck. We didn't say anything, just collapsed into sleeping bags or sat near the cold fire pit, trying to calm down. The sun was just breaking through the trees when we heard footsteps coming through the woods. Not loud, just slow and steady. My heart jumped again, but it wasn't wolves or bears. It was the couple camped a little ways off down the trail, maybe a few hundred meters from us. They'd seen us the day before when we set up and came by to talk. They said a park ranger had come by late the night before, knocking on their cooler with a flashlight to make sure they were up. The ranger told them there had been a fresh bear sighting on the ridge. Not just tracks sightings. said the bear had come pretty close to a camp 2 nights ago and they were checking to warn everyone. We hadn't been at our camp. We'd been stumbling around out there, half delirious, with one tiny flashlight and a pocket full of weed. My stomach sank hearing that. All that time in the woods, the rustling, the snapping branches, that heavy feeling of being watched. It might not have been our minds playing tricks. It could have been a bear. Could have been something way too real, way too close. We didn't stay another night. Packed everything up as soon as we were clear-headed enough to move. Quietly, no one said much on the drive back. I didn't sleep right for days after that. Still think about it. Sometimes, when I hear a twig snap in the dark or see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, what really sticks with me is how close we came to being just another story people tell about stupid teenagers getting lost, never coming back. All that stood between us and something really bad was luck and a flimsy piece of red flannel. We haven't camped there again. We barely talk about that trip. But sometimes, when I smell pine sap or hear the wind in the trees, I remember being out there. Lost, scared, too high to think straight, with wolves howling and something big moving just out of sight. I remember it so clearly, even though it happened years ago. I must have been around 11, maybe just starting 6th grade. That summer was the last time my mom ever took us camping. Not because we stopped wanting to go or because of money or schedules or anything like that, just that after that trip, she never talked about camping again. We never asked why. I think we all knew the reason, even if it was unspoken. We were camping in a truck bed camper, but instead of keeping it mounted on the truck, Mom had unhitched it and set it down on its metal leg stands. It was one of those older campers, small but with everything crammed in tight. A little table, a kitchenette, a bed over the cab area, and some cabinets. Creaked when you moved, like every inch of it had arthritis. But I loved it. Something about the small space made me feel safe, tucked away, surrounded by nature but also protected from it. The campground wasn't particularly fancy. Just a handful of RV spots, some tent lots with picnic tables, a fire ring at each one, and a couple of walking trails that went off into the woods. There was one main gravel road that looped through the whole place and a bathhouse at the center with toilets and showers. We had been there before a few times over the years. It wasn't far from home, just about an hour and a half drive, but far enough to feel like an adventure. Mom always said she liked it because it was quiet and the people were respectful. And she was right, usually families with kids, older couples, sometimes groups of friends or church groups. Nothing rowdy or loud. That night started out normal. We cooked hot dogs over the fire, and Mom let me and my younger brother have marshmallows even though we'd already had some earlier in the day. The air was warm and sticky, typical summer night, with the smell of pine and smoke clinging to everything. I remember the fire crackling, the buzzing of bugs in the dark, the occasional echo of laughter or music from other campers. Just peaceful. We climbed into the camper a little after 10. I remember laying on the thin mattress, sweating a bit even though the windows were open. There was barely any breeze, and the fan Mom had brought wasn't doing much. I stared up at the small ceiling light above my bunk, watching moths throw themselves at it from outside, casting their shadows through the mesh screen. Eventually, I fell asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. Maybe 2 a.m.? 3? It was still pitch black. I opened my eyes and the first thing I saw was Mom sitting on her bed at the far end of the camper. She wasn't moving, just sitting there, back straight, hands on her lap, looking tense, not panicked, just deeply, deeply focused. Her eyes were fixed somewhere off in the dark window behind me, like she was trying to listen to something. I sat up slowly, not saying anything at first. I didn't know what had woken me. Maybe the camper shaking slightly or the wind slamming against the side. But I felt something wasn't right. I could hear something. It was far off, but it was growing. It was a low, constant rumble, like a train, and there weren't any train tracks anywhere near the campground. I looked at Mom and just said the word, "Tornado." She didn't speak, just gave a single nod. I didn't even know what to do. We just sat there, both of us listening. My brother was still asleep, curled up on the small lower bunk. The camper creaked again as a gust hit it from the side. The metal legs made this groaning noise like they weren't sure how much more they could take. The sound kept growing, not fast but steady, like something moving over the land with purpose. It wasn't a whistle or a howl, it was a deep vibration that you didn't just hear, you felt it in your chest, like the ground itself was humming. I had never heard anything like it before, and I haven't since. That's the part that sticks with me the most. The wind picked up fast. Trees around the campground started swaying hard, and leaves smacked against the windows. The rain came suddenly, like someone dumped a bucket on the roof, loud and fast. It hit so hard it made the camper shudder. I remember thinking that the whole thing could just tip over. It wasn't even connected to the truck. It was just sitting there like a toy box on stilts. I imagined it lifting off the ground, flipping, sliding across the gravel, smashing into a tree. I wondered if we'd even have time to jump out if that happened. There was nowhere to go. The bathhouse was across the road, but you couldn't make a run for it in that wind. You couldn't see anything out the windows. It was just black, except for the flashes of lightning. It lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. Eventually, the sound started to fade. The train noise softened into the distance. The wind slowed. The rain let up. I realized I had been holding my breath. Mom still didn't move for a long time. Eventually, she reached down and shook my brother gently awake. He groaned but didn't really understand what had happened. He just looked around confused and went back to sleep. Neither of us slept after that. We got out of the camper as soon as the sky started to lighten. The air smelled like wet leaves and mud. Everything was soaked. The road was covered in small branches, and some of the trees had split down the middle. The ground was littered with leaves and pine needles and bits of torn up tarps. A couple of the smaller trailers had tipped over. Nothing massive, just those little pop-up ones that fold out with canvas sides. One was leaning against a tree with its wheels still spinning. People were outside, standing around, assessing the damage. No one was yelling or crying. Everyone just had this stunned, exhausted look, like we had all survived something together but didn't quite know how to talk about it yet. We found out later that a troop of Girl Scouts had been tent camping on the far side of the loop, down by the edge of the woods. Apparently, the tornado had passed right over their part of the campground. It hadn't touched down fully, just enough to lift their tents up about 3 to 5 feet off the ground and then drop them back down in a heap. Poles snapped, tents collapsed, gear went flying. One of the leaders ran with a flashlight to the bathhouse and led the whole group there. That's where they stayed for the rest of the night, huddled together on the tiled floor, with sleeping bags wrapped around their shoulders, trying to stay calm while the storm passed. When we walked by that morning, I saw them all coming out, blinking in the morning light. Some of the younger girls looked like they'd been crying. One had a scraped knee. The adults looked like they hadn't slept at all, but no one was seriously hurt. Mom didn't say much as we packed up. She wasn't angry or scared anymore, just quiet, focused. She helped us clean up the campsite, made sure we didn't leave anything behind, and then we hitched the camper back onto the truck. The metal legs were muddy and slightly bent, but still standing. We drove home in silence for most of the trip. The clouds were still thick, and the highway was wet. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past, still thinking about that sound, that horrible, rumbling, rising sound that didn't seem real. We never went camping again after that. The camper stayed in the driveway for a few months and then was eventually sold. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. I think that night made something shift in Mom. The way she sat there in the dark, listening for something she couldn't control, holding it all together while everything around us was falling apart. That was enough. Now that I'm older, I understand it better. Camping is supposed to be a way to escape, to relax. But once you see how quickly things can go from peaceful to dangerous, how powerless you really are out there in the wild, it changes how you see things. It changes what you're willing to risk. And some things, once you've lived through them, are enough to make you never want to go back.